Harry Gray, thanks for coming on the show. Co-founder of Noble Origins and co-host of the Meatmafia Podcast here in Austin, Texas.
Yes, sir.
It's nice to have another culture clash conversation with a proper American.
Dude, I'm excited about it.
Brit. Yeah. So let's delve straight in. I want to sort of pick your brains about American culture, and then we can maybe compare that to the British culture in 2024. So what is the American dream to you? And do you feel like that exists in 2024?
I don't think the American dream is dead, but I feel like we're at an inflection point for sure.
What is the American dream to you?
I think the American dream is being able to pursue the highest version of yourself. And, I believe in divinity and destiny. And I think that, all of us have a calling to tap into that. So I believe like that is the American dream, to tap into what you are put on this earth to do.
Do you feel like there's been a bit of tension with the American dream in the last few years, and maybe it's been harder to pursue that?
Definitely. I think it's partially economic. I think there's tons of issues related to the economy, but also like socially.
What are some of those economic issues?
Inflation, for sure. We've seen the affordability crisis in food, in housing, in even just energy, oil prices and prices for basic commodities have gone up. So we're just seeing the cost of living go up. And I think that's all pegged back to the debasement of the currency. Like, we've just printed so much money in the last 4 years that it's become really hard to actually save. Like, the idea of actually saving in a savings account really like no longer exists. Interest rates have over the last like 10 years just been historically low. And that's just incentivizing people to either spend their money or invest their money in other things. So I think that actually just creates a really challenging backbone for a healthy economy. Like, if saving is off the table, then the government is just essentially incentivizing you to not have your money parked in the bank or parked somewhere else. They want you investing it and using it. So I think that, partially the inflation issue. I think that jobs are going away faster because of technology, which is making it a little bit more difficult for people to see a career in industries that have historically been there. I think we're seeing industries kind of get wiped out by some technology too.
How do you see that moving in terms of Austin? This is a big tech hub, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen a lot of change in the last few years here?
Yeah. So I moved here 3 years ago. I've definitely seen a lot of change happen. I feel like from a tech perspective, it's honestly a really net beneficiary to Austin. I think a lot of the tech jobs in Austin are sales related, and most of the AI boom I feel like is happening here. And like Jasper AI is an example. Like, they were based out of Austin and San Francisco. So like there's just a lot of tech jobs still here, and I think it's because there's such a diverse group of people that live here and work in all sorts of different sectors, not just tech. Like we were just talking before, like this is like one of the podcasting meccas. It's becoming an entertainment mecca. So it's pretty cool. I do think the growth of the city is like pretty unprecedented to like what I'm used to. I grew up in DC. It's like always slowly growing. And then I moved to Boston for a little while, and Boston was growing. It was growing quickly, but it was like all because of biotech. But Austin is it's exploding.
And it might seem
moving here all the time.
And it might seem a bit random that we hone in on Austin now to the listeners back in the UK or across America. But I think it's super important because Austin is representative of what's going on in the rest of the country. Why do you think people are moving here, and why has it become the podcast mecca when somewhere like LA was always the mecca for all media?
Yeah, I think there's a real renaissance happening in Austin around free thinking. I think people who are creative and looking for creative expression, but I think that lives so much in LA for a long time. And I didn't really get to experience that too much, but from the outside looking in, it seems like there's a lot of like bureaucratic red tape around the industry that was entertainment. And now I think people are moving to Austin just looking for almost to just get rid of that bureaucratic nature that I think a lot of the coastal cities in the US have. And people are finding it to be a really entrepreneurial city and a city that has a ton of opportunities. So I think there's a total renaissance happening here. Like lot of people in the health and wellness space, like you just were talking to one of our good buddies, and just like so many people who are creating things here, not just like music, podcasts, but also companies and all sorts of different things happening in Austin. I think it's just incredibly exciting to be a part of it, be in a city where there's still a lot of creative juice, especially having come from cities where I feel like there wasn't as much creativity. So Austin's, I think, has a lot of promise.
Yeah, I think this really feels like the land of the free here in Austin. Do you ever feel like, for us maybe to do some introspection, being podcasters, do you think that maybe that freedom can go too far sometimes and podcasts can actually detract from intellectualism and discussing ideas properly?
It's a really good question. Ultimately, I think that the free market wins out. And if you're putting good ideas out there, people are going to resonate with them. I do think that the nature of social media, like, it makes it so that people can just go become a 30-second expert on one topic and then just regurgitate stuff into a camera and make themselves seem like they're an expert, or things of that nature where that you can kind of cover things up for a short term. But I do think that just freedom of expression and being able to put your ideas out there without, there will be consequences. Like maybe people don't resonate with your ideas, or your ideas are just genuinely bad. But I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think that's ultimately like, how things progress, and we build, kind of a foundation of shared social fabric and other things. But I do think that, you can take it too far, but it could be to your own detriment as well.
Because it feels like the value isn't winning at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, at least, in online, just, clickbait and just like low value content that just gets clicks. So it's how we've incentivized people to put stuff out there. It's like long form. And what I love about podcasting, I think it skews away from that. So if we're having a conversation, like the last thing I'm thinking about is an Instagram clip that is going to come from this conversation. So everything feels a lot more authentic. Yeah. Whereas if you just have someone as a talking head video, they've scripted it, run it through AI tools to see if it's going to be viral or like, whatever. Yeah. That's a little bit of less authentic. So
it's difficult because things are evolving so rapidly and you want to stay in the loop with AI and all this technology, but the less and less friction you create in terms of faking a video or altering it, the less authentic it becomes. And it's almost like, whilst all this technological development is going on, to keep things really truly valuable, you need to stray away from that and almost take it back to the bare bones Joe Rogan 4-hour conversation. And you do see that in the long term that wins out too.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think if you're playing the long game, you don't really fear, or you don't over-index to the short term where you're saying, yeah, we need to go viral tomorrow, or the lights are going to go off and we're not going to have this podcast. We're not going to have this media platform. And I truly think that the next 5 years and hopefully beyond of social media and podcasting is going to heavily favor those who are truly authentic and genuine. When I look at my feed, there's just a lot of impostering and mimicry going on. Yeah. And you don't see people who are really rooted in something strong too often. They're out there. But I think social media feeds these days just feel more toxic than not.
What makes you say that it's going to change in 5 years? Why isn't it just going to keep on getting Mr. Beastified more and more?
I think it will keep getting Mr. Beastified more and more, but I think over time people will realize that all they're doing is chasing cheap dopamine through following all the different really charades and acts that people are putting on YouTube and other platforms to catch people's attention. And I think ultimately what people want, or maybe this is me casting my own bias over people, but what people ultimately want and fulfills people is genuine connection. So I'm like, whether I'm just saying this to like cast it out into the future as a vision, but I really think that in-person connection is unbeatable. That's why I love podcasting. That's why I love really what we do is like, we do host a lot of in-person events and bring people together around all the different things that we're doing. So, I see it in people. Like, people don't want to be drained by their phone and constantly comparing themselves to other people, or constantly just eating up the stimulation that they're getting from their phone through all the different social media platforms.
It feels like people have a good balance here in Austin, and it's so interesting coming here from the UK because you guys do have all that technological development going on, but at the same time, you've got the weather, you've got certain traditions here that mean that you are outside with people. And it's something I haven't actually really thought about until this conversation, that juxtaposition going on. Whereas everywhere else, it's either one or the other. And more often than not, it's the technology route, disconnection from reality. I mean, in the UK, even just little things like we don't have any good pickleball courts or any good gyms that you can hang out in a sauna with your boys in after. It's just not really a thing there. And I think that's one of the big things I'd want to see change in the next few years, is just those simple activities that bring you together, in men's cases, side by side, doing something. And then with that, you open up and you talk about things. And I think you would see the disappearance of a lot of these pathological mental illnesses that we talk about nowadays.
Yeah. And especially with like younger generations, I feel like, just the ability to connect in person. Like, COVID hit people who are younger than, were in college anyone who was in college at that time or younger. They went through the mass digitalization of, hey, we're just going completely virtual. And then afterwards, it felt like we sped up like 5-10 years in terms of adopting that type of technology and just being virtual. So I think that, health, if that's like our core mission with the Meat Mafia, is just like get people healthier, get people inspired and empowered to make changes around their health. It literally all starts with community and how you relate to people and how you can connect with people. Because I think the backbone of every single blue zone, every single blue zone country, they all have two shared components. One is like deep connection with community and deep connection with some sort of higher power.
What's a blue zone country?
So they did the blue zone studies and essentially just looked into all the different countries that had the longest lifespan. And they just were looking to see like, what did they have in common from like nutrition, lifestyle, all these different factors. And two of the main things were religion or some sort of commitment to a higher power, and then community. So
how do you think religion ties into the puzzle of technology and this ever developing, shortening attention span? Because to be religious, and I'm not religious, by the way, I'm completely agnostic. I'm not an atheist either. I think that's just as religious as being something like Christian. It takes attention span and time and a bit of boredom to sit in a church. And I think as a result of technology, you've seen this demise of religion. How does that tie into the puzzle?
Yeah, I feel like I've been on a journey the last 3 years of refinding my faith. And so I can speak from my personal experience that getting bored is really good. And I think people are really afraid of being bored and slowing down in a world that's telling them to go faster and, like this, buy this, ads thrown in your face every 2 seconds. There's a million things that are keeping us distracted. And I believe that ultimately the earth was created in a way where as soon as you detach from that, you go step outside in nature, you slow down, you let your nervous system actually connect with the speed that we're designed to be at, the speed that the earth moves at, which is much slower than what a lot of cities move at. You really realize that, sitting in silence and being quiet, meditating, finding time for prayer, like those are sacred practices that I think some cultures in the world practice regularly and reap the benefits of. And I worry that the Western idea of just consumerism and the technology really is sitting in juxtaposition to what I believe to be like a really peaceful and joyous connection with Mother Nature and with God. So I don't think that technology right now does a good job of promoting a relationship and connecting with God. And, but I think there's ways to use the technology to our benefit. So I'm hopeful, but I do think that in a world where technology is moving faster, people are adopting changes, like the changes in technology are just like total leaps in terms of what they used to be.
Mm.
And I think that, the more I think about it, the more I feel like we need some time to slow down and connect with higher power. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your original question, but
it does. And I think that consumerism is the new religion in many ways. And I fear, and I'm lucky to have avoided this trap, I fear that a lot of people are going to reach the age of 30 and they were influencers, super successful, got all the followers in the world, but to what end? It didn't achieve anything. It just brought them this sort of reassurance that they were doing the right thing, the more followers they got. But followers in and of themselves don't equate to any value. And I can't quite articulate how much of a perception shifter that was to me, but growing up in the era of social media, I literally didn't see past that at all. Like, it blew my mind coming to that realization that followers weren't valuable. That was all I thought about. And I'll hold my hands up and say it as a teenager. Like, it literally, there was no other option. It was just followers equate to clout, therefore it's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not inherently a bad thing. But
of course not.
If you're not rooted in something deeper than getting followers, then you're really building that house on a pretty weak foundation. And I worry too. Like a lot of people are growing up with this false promise that fame is more easily accessible than ever these days with phones and social media. So the ability to solely pursue that and really put yourself at the world today feels more hedonistic than any period, or the ability for it to be hedonistic with, hey, here's my social media account. I'm going to blast this out. I'm the center of this world. Your ability to replace yourself with God is, I think, incredibly easy. And I think that pride is really, really nasty in the way that it consumes us. And social media is it's like gasoline on that sin of pride. And being humble in today's world, I think is like a very hard thing to do for people who have access to technology that allows them to basically have everything at your fingertips. It's a buffet. Like, you can go online and you can, find the coolest cars, girls, people who are making fortunes online, and just, you can worship all of that. But at the end of the day, worshiping all of that doesn't change your position in the world. And even if you get some of those things, the nice cars, the big businesses, the woman, like, you're still worshiping things that are really just feeding your external validation and not actually doing any inner work and filling your heart with things that last. I think God teaches eternal life. God teaches us that there's a spirit that exists beyond the physical realm that will be here, that was here before we were here, and will be here afterwards. And I think that's really hard to tap into when you're just constantly chasing these materialistic things.
Yeah, these temporary materialistic things.
Yeah.
It'd be so interesting to see a fame inflation chart, because we do it with money.
It'd be so interesting.
We've never done it with fame. So 1 million followers in 1980, that's untold fame.
You're like a king or something.
Yeah, you're Freddie Mercury or whoever. Whereas nowadays you can get that from one video. Yeah. And I want to fucking make this chart.
Yeah, dude, do it. That would actually it would be fascinating.
That would slap everyone in the face, because it would be like, okay, I've got 1 million followers and I think I'm the dog's bollocks, as we say in the UK.
What does
it actually equate to? It equates to like a medieval serf, like that lucked out with one good harvest or something.
Yeah. Well, it's actually a really interesting point. So play that out for the next 10 years. Eventually, all these followers mean nothing. Like if 1 million followers means nothing over a certain period of time, like I think you start to dilute the value of all these followers. Who's to say some of them aren't bots? Who's to say, this digital world? And I think the digital world is obviously here to stay. You can't put that genie back in a bottle. But I think the ability to actually have people who are looking you in the eyes being like, I care about like what you have to say about these certain topics. It's going to get harder and harder. It's just going to get more and more saturated.
And coming from a 19-year-old who has no business experience, what happens when inflation gets too high? Fucking crashes.
Yeah.
So maybe we see that, and it is inevitable that we sort of branch out into smaller communities online that actually add value. And I mean, I don't know if you can maybe give me some insight, because you're slightly older, on the trends of financial situations when there is a crash. What happens when that rebuild occurs? If maybe there's something that would transfer over into what we're talking about, just to explore that idea a bit further.
Yeah, I wish I was a little bit older to give you better experience, because I was in high school during 2008. So like I've only seen like the good years.
Right.
Like for the most part. But what I know about crashes is like, there's a lot of people who get washed out, but it's actually where a lot of the businesses that are multi-generational that last a really long time or end up being built, because the people who are intelligent, persistent, and just not willing to give up will be resourceful and find ways to make things work. So I think entrepreneurship is just it's a game of persistence. And if you're a podcaster and you're making money through the podcast or other means that are entrepreneurial, I genuinely think that hard times are a blessing. They teach you where your blind spots are, and ultimately, there's just opportunity. When things get really hard, like businesses start going under, but there's opportunity to fill gaps. And if your head is up and you're on a swivel and you're paying attention to what's happening, there's opportunity. So I used to be locked up in fear. Like I was in a corporate job thinking that exact thought, where it's like, okay, but like what happens if there's a downturn? Like, will I still be able to make money? Will my business go under? And it's like, dude, you haven't even taken the first step of like getting in the game, and you're worrying about like if times get hard, like you're going to lose.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to just like come to terms with that relationship with fear, which is ultimately like, dude, all of this stuff, win, lose, or draw, is going to work in your favor if you allow it to.
How do you see, we've got this disconnection from reality and we've got technology developing. How do you see key players like Andrew Tate filling that gap? Do you feel like he's maybe more of a symptom of the society that we're living in, or do you think he's a cause of the problems that we're facing with something like a crisis of masculinity?
It's a really good question. I feel like Andrew Tate has probably been a blessing for a lot of people, calling a spade culturally. And I feel like he's also definitely a product of just what we've created. But I do think that he's kind of filled this void post cancel culture. That was, I don't know if you remember cancel culture.
I do, ish. Just like, because of like my favorite YouTubers being cancelled from it.
But like, dude, he wouldn't have been, there's no way that he would have been around. But there's been this sort of period, I think, like this last like 5 years, where masculinity has now started to be re-embraced. There's less talk around toxic masculinity. I still think it's, and maybe this is me just being in my own echo chamber here in Austin, but I do think people are now seeing that, masculine, feminine dynamics are really important. We should understand both of them. And like, I don't necessarily think everything that Andrew Tate has to say is all good or all bad. I do think he's just a product of the system. I think that for the most part, he's done a lot of good in terms of waking people up, and kind of the jarring content that he puts out there. Definitely, I think it's probably fathered more guys who are lost than it has turned people away, if I had to guess. Teaching people about, how to be confident, how to step into masculine traits. I don't think he's right about a lot of things, but and I also don't follow his content a ton, so I'm definitely not speaking from an area of like knowing everything that he does and says. I also think like his business doings, from what I've heard of, it's like, started out doing cam girl stuff. It's like, All right. And then he's going to talk about religion and the need for religion. Like, those two things don't really go hand in hand. So on one hand, I feel like he's done a great job, like putting life back into the conversation around the need for religion and belief in a higher power. But I also think that some of the stuff he does and says is a little bit bombastic.
Bombastic's a good word. I highly disagree with him as an individual.
As a person.
I think, he's a pretty highness individual, if that's the right word to use.
Like thinks really highly of himself?
No, as in like heinous, I think is the word. Heinous,
yeah.
Different pronunciations.
Yeah.
But I question his integrity a lot. And, he makes all this content speaking about empowering men.
Yeah.
But then he goes on the Full Send podcast and laughs about how he scammed men out of their money and their life savings and ruined their marriages to start his cam business.
Yeah, see, that's nasty.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance with him, and potentially, I saw him as a comedian when I first saw his videos, and it's just...
Was he actually marketing himself as a comedian?
No, not at all.
Oh, you're saying
but I saw him as a comedian, and then it would have been funny. It would have been like, look at this guy who's this macho figure that's every single stereotype of what a man should be in today's world, but can't be. But when it becomes a problem is when people take it seriously. And it's weird how the internet does that. I've seen that with a few things where people take things so literally.
Yeah.
And I don't really quite understand why that is.
Yeah, the internet, it's so easy to just, it's like, pulling a verse from the Bible that makes, like, fully out of context, makes no sense, and then you say it and let it kind of fit your needs. Like, I feel like people will hear things online and just like, be like, oh, I get what he's talking about, but ultimately, no context, you really don't understand the nature of it.
Yeah, and I haven't grown up in a conservative background at all, and I don't identify myself as a conservative, whatever the fuck that's worth.
Yeah.
But I definitely see value to sticking to certain traditions and falling back on infrastructure that's been in place for hundreds and thousands of years for a reason. Whereas I've been toying with this idea recently in my head that the internet, when it first started, it was like, look at this new thing. We obviously can't trust it because it's so underdeveloped. So no one would go to the internet for their revision, for exams or whatever else. They would use books. And then you see this great evolution where suddenly everyone trusts the internet, especially just speaking anecdotally from my friends. If you want the answer to a question that you're talking about in a conversation, what do? You Google it and you take the first answer. Right. Now you take the first answer from ChatGPT, which is a whole other conversation. But the way I see the direction of travel is that we're going to get to a point where, and this is in the next few years, the internet's so developed that it sort of horseshoes back to you can't trust anything, because not that it's underdeveloped, but because there's so much development, you can easily fake a 100 branch citation for a study that never happened.
I think you're already seeing it. Yeah. I think you're spot on. There's, the more imposters and fake accounts and bot accounts that can pop up, and it just becomes just a sea of like, well, there's probably some people on here who are genuine, but it seems like it's just a lot of fake stuff. So I'm just not even going to really like fully pay attention to it. But I feel like it's so engaging and designed to be just like consumed that people will be hooked, you know? In a lot of ways, like, people will still fall for it. So like there will still be life online. I just don't think it'll be one where like you'll see a whole lot of people who are healthy mentally and physically, because I think the trust factor online is just so hard to actually maintain.
And maybe this is my naive opinion, not sort of looking at the consequences further down the line, but I think there should totally be pretty extreme consequences legally if you're online pitching these ideas that World War III is about to start as soon as something else pops off in the Middle East or wherever. You see it all the time, is this World War III? Question mark, question mark, question mark. And it's all this culture porn that stokes fear. And I think it's genuinely harmful for society, because it used to be that social media and the internet was detached from our everyday lives, but now they are our everyday lives.
Yeah, totally. Could you imagine just living off grid, being in the middle of nowhere, having no semblance of any idea of like what's happening in any other corner of the world, like the speed that you would operate at is so different than what we see online. Every day we're seeing World War III, World War III, World War III. It's like they're just, whether anyone knows it or not, it's just programming that into our subconscious that, you know, we need to be in more of a heightened state of fear. We need to be careful. Things are not okay right now. The culture is not healthy. We're always in contention with other people. That's terrible for our subconscious.
Yeah, it's like one big placebo that's eventually going to convince you that it actually works.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, whether it's someone consciously doing it or not consciously doing it, that in a lot of ways is like mind control. It's just keep pumping out this message that, you know, these things are happening, war all the time. And eventually I feel like people have gotten numb to the idea of war. Like I'll see a video on my feed and I'm like, oh, it's, you know, looks like Call of Duty, you know? And I say that and it's like, it's sad how numb we've come to a lot of that stuff.
I always have these dreams of me actually, and dreams as in fucking nightmares of me being thrown into a war zone and suddenly it hits you in the face of how real it is. Because I think so many of us now, if we got sent over to war, we would take it lightly and we'd think that it was Call of Duty or Twitter and there's no ramifications, and suddenly you get...
And then you'd see something crazy happen and it would be like, oh man.
And I think that's what the internet's done to us. I've spoken about this before on the pod, and it's that detachment from morality, and maybe you can ground this back to religion, but when you lose the religion and you're detached from the consequences of your actions, it's much easier to be immoral. And I like to use the example of, you know, if there were... my friends always take the piss out of me for saying this because they think it's just such a horrible, crude example. But like, if there was a little Asian child in the room with you now, sewing that t-shirt for you...
Oh yeah, you would never wear it.
You would never wear it. But yeah, we're both sat here in Converses and Reeboks or whatever.
Yeah.
You know how those were made, and I do.
Yeah. Yeah, we obfuscate reality like so easily. It's so easy to just put things out of mind. And yeah, the internet just does an amazing job of detaching us from what's actually happening. When you see videos of like cobalt mines in Africa for all these electric cars, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you just hear people talking about electric cars saving people. Like it's like the future. This is like what's going to save us from climate change. And then you're like, well, hold on. We literally have people diving into this cobalt mine, probably harming their health being in there. And they're just, you know, it's in the middle of nowhere, Africa. And yeah, those videos are terrifying. And then we live in this reality where, you know, you can't have electric vehicles without that cobalt. So yeah, I think the internet can be used as a tool for good, but you need to be so mindful about how you're using it. And I think that does shift when you start to become more of a creator and less of a consumer online. You know, putting more stuff out there. You can then start to see the internet for what it can be. But it can absolutely be a tool for good. But I think like right now we're going through a phase where it's more harmful than good for a lot of people.
Well, there's a big debate on whether kids should be banned from social media. Jonathan Haidt talks about how kids shouldn't have social media or maybe even smartphones until they're 16. And I love the man and everything he says is spot on. But I just quibble with that because I look at myself and I'm here in Austin, Texas at 19, not to fucking blow my own trumpet, but the only reason I've been able to do that at a young age, or what's considered a young age, is because of social media and growing up with YouTube tutorials to be able to film videos and, you know, even just booking the flights. And I think that if you get rid of social media from a young age, you're gatekeeping that technology and you're making people digitally less literate. Yeah. And they're going to have to pick that up at a later age, which I think is dangerous as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the democratization of information and access to things that are on YouTube that can, like, I'm sure you probably learned more from YouTube than you did any sort of schooling. Like 100%. Just being able to like figure out stuff online and make money at an early age. And like, I'm more or less the same. Like, YouTube has taught me so much. So to say that we should completely block stuff off and completely ban stuff, I think is also maybe playing into the extremist nature of like how powerful the technology is. I go back to, and I feel like it's not necessarily the solution for everyone, but I think that like it is the direct problem is like if you're not grounded in something much deeper than, technology or, chasing money, whatever the thing is, whatever the vice is, then it's going to get a hold of you and it'll use you for whatever it wants to use you for.
What should people be grounded in, and how do they go about doing that in a modern era?
Yeah, I mean, I went through my early 20s not being grounded in much, and I think we could probably both agree that people are spiritual beings. And I think that if we agree on that, then we need to tend to
what do you mean by
our spiritual nature. The things that are unseen, but still affect us in our physical. So, the spiritual side of things would just be the thoughts you have, your overall, I think like the emotional realm is connected to the spiritual realm. But like ultimately it's a question of like what is good for us and going to last, and what is bad for us and going to not last. And I think that most people need to be plugged into some sort of spiritual practice, spiritual disciplines that keep them accountable to their own self, their own well-being. So, what that looks like is like being in community, having people around you who are also grounded in some sort of spiritual disciplines. Spiritual disciplines could be reading some sort of scripture. It's like ancient wisdom, prayer, time connecting with higher power, worshiping higher power. I think that all these things are kind of lost and probably feel super foreign to a lot of people during a period where religion and just believing in God has almost been drained from society over the past several decades. But I think over a long enough period of time, it's very hard to ignore the fact that we are full of something that like we don't really know where we've come from. And so I think if you haven't answered that question early enough, it's really gonna lead your life in a way where maybe you're not making decisions based on a firm set of moral and ethical code that through every area of your life you're living within integrity of a certain way of being. And so I think if you don't have that, it can lead to a lot of dysmorphing personality and mental health issues. And I think we see it today in like the rise of transgenderism. I think a lot of that is actually a byproduct of people not being rooted in identity in, what were we created to be. And I think, questions around identity as a young adult is very common. Like being a tomboy as a young girl is very common. And I think, there's just like an objective truth to like men and women. And now we've like allowed what I would say is like dark, like really darkness into that whole conversation, allowing people to kind of be whoever they want to be.
To play devil's advocate, do you not think that we've evolved past this need for made up organized religion, and actually we're so developed? We talk about technology and how the human race has progressed so much. We're now here in 2024, and maybe we've discovered our true selves, our true identities. Is that an option on the table?
Yeah, I think that this is more like a transhumanism argument.
Transgender argument.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you want to continue to live in that world, it's, you need some form of, scientific intervention in order to have, procreate. And I think like procreation at the end of the day is really like a fundamental backbone of like continuing on lineage, life, and ultimately, like I think that there's an objective reality where, if you can't naturally procreate, then we're doing things outside of the design that we were supposed to do. So I don't think that the world that we're living in, I fear that a lot of people are buying something that like science is going to be able to fill all these gaps. And, when you want to just like change genders and put all these drugs into your body, and then one day, like you want to go back or you made the wrong decision, like how bad do you feel if that's the case? And what mental problems are you dealing with there? So I think it's a spiritual problem. I think it's, people not having roots in their like their origins of their family, who they are, feeling a sense of being and a strong sense of identity pulls people into areas where, I think some of it is, beyond the mental strain that I think you're putting on people in terms of you don't know what gender you are. I think there's also like physical harm being done there, not being able to revert back, or maybe even not being able to have kids, which is a blessing.
And to push back as devil's advocate again, I hope you don't mind me sort of playing devil's advocate.
Absolutely not.
If you believe in the spiritual and sort of transcending and this unknown realm, are you not open to the idea that maybe people could have been born in the wrong body and that's why they need to transition and actually break away from science, just like religion does, and discover their true selves?
Do you think religion breaks away from science?
Well, by definition, you believe in the divine, which is separate to science, I think. Because it's unexplained.
You're right. So, yeah, I think that there's good spirits and bad spirits. And those are judged by the fruit that they create. And so, if someone is making decisions around their identity on, they were this and now they want to be that, I think that, the output of, quality of life and mental well-being and all of that will prove out like ultimately whether or not that's good or bad. I think there's tangible proof to what happens when you have your identity rooted in a system like the natural design. And I think natural law is something that falls outside of serious religious context, but it's something that we can all understand, right? Like birds and bees and monkeys, they don't have these questions whether what's a male, what's a female. Humans, we do. So what has been ushered into our consciousness that has allowed us to ask these questions? And surely science is a huge part of it, but I think people put so much faith in science for no reason, or not for no reason, but blind faith in science to me feels like way more blind faith than you need to root yourself in, the religious world. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. And, I think that to look back on history, there's more empirical evidence that Jesus walked this earth than the Roman Empire.
I think anyone who disputes Jesus' existence is stupid.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting you bringing up the point of grounding everything in this spirituality, and maybe to make it more easily digestible to someone who is atheist or whatever else. I've been traveling a lot recently. I did a tour of the Bible Belt, which was super cool.
How was that?
Incredible, just fascinating experience, meeting all these different people, and it's something that you only hear about in the UK. And we did a tour of like Alabama, just as far away as you could get from any town, to all these different churches. I then have been doing a lot of work in the Middle East, so I've been able to go to some mosques over there as well, go to Medina, which is the second holiest mosque. And then this time in Austin, I had the chance to go to a Jewish synagogue as well. So I've been a bit of a theological slut, basically, like that.
What have you learned?
Just so much. But those spiritual approaches that you've been talking about, to ground it maybe in science for those that don't believe in religion, even just seeing the habits that sort of extend across all three of those different areas, it's that idea of community and a purpose that transcends yourself. And that's the huge difference that I see, is that away from these religions, people are so individualistic, and I have to fight my natural instincts to avoid this, because I'm pretty self-centered naturally. But you see just unlimited success when you do come together as a community, not just in terms of someone can do a favor for you.
What do you mean success?
As in, okay, so let me break this down. Even materially, you've got the networking opportunities, you can get a job through a friend. But what I was about to say is that beyond that, even more important, you feel this fulfillment when you have responsibility for other people. And you know that they've got your back. Whereas outside of those communities, feels like we're sort of lacking any other community that's non-religious that can bring people together in the same way. And it's a big lesson I've learned over the last few years, is that everyone is looking out for number one, which is themselves. And I think as a young person, that sucks to find out, and it's a tough bullet to bite.
Yeah. I think there's pockets of people who believe that, give first and being a servant is how we're designed to operate. But I think naturally we are fighting the natural human tendency to constantly think of ourselves first. So I think that in all those places that you explored, those are all teaching, like, lower yourself, reduce yourself to something that's greater than yourself. And ultimately, like, the two great commandments in the Bible are love God and love others like you love yourself. And I think it's a calling for us to be in relationship, but like actually genuinely coming to people with a heart that, like, I genuinely want to care about Elliot. Like, if he has things going on in his life where I can be of service to, I can actually help him. Whereas a lot of people are just super transactional in the commercialized world today. But giving without any expectation is selfishly, it is a great thing. It feels good to give without expectation, and people don't really know why. It's, I think, just how we're designed. We want to ultimately, I think, serve other people, help other people. And that's where we start to build trust, which is, again, something that is a firm foundation, like a spiritual foundation built on that trust. And when you have trust in relationship, and people can know that, like, dude, if I got, like, in a car accident and I needed somebody to, like, come pick me up and come help me out, like, I will have someone there to come pick me out and help me out. So yeah, I think that it's really interesting that you did that. And I'm curious if there was any kind of, like, gaps in kind of how you saw each of the Bible Belt, the monastery, and then what was the third one? So there was the synagogue here, this trip, and then the mosque over in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. I'm sure you saw a lot of similarities and differences in terms of the religious practices.
If I'm completely honest, so many similarities.
Yeah.
Just a different present wrapping. That was it. Just a different gift wrapping. And that's, in a sad sort of sense, it's actually taken me one step further away from believing in anything divine, because I see these same trends across different cultures that never had even heard of each other whilst they were coming up with these customs and religions. And I see that as down to, human design and us all. We always end up having some sort of God. We always look for the answer and a creator. And it's maybe just sort of dressed up differently. But for me, that was quite nice to see, because it made me realize that there are just certain things that you need in life to have a fulfilled life. And it's made me go about implementing them in a more secular way. Like, tell you about Mecca. I went, not Mecca. You're not allowed there unless you're Muslim. Medina, the second holiest city to Mecca. going in that mosque, it's just incredible.
Could you feel like a presence when you walk in?
No. Yeah. I could feel how incredible it was, and it was the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. Just endless, ornate archways as far as the eye can see and beyond. And I went there and saw my friend pray, and I sort of just sat and watched, and it made me realize, even just from a physical perspective, how healthy it is to pray, because it's kind of just like Pilates in many ways. You're stretching, you're detached from any technology, and it's just you, yourself, God, if you believe in him. It works, definitely. And I'm sure if I tried it, it would work for me too. And that's what I saw in the Bible Belt as well. People, going to the front while they were singing and holding on to the railing and sort of just really connecting heavily with Jesus. And I think there's lots that we are scared to take from religion, even in a secular world, that we really should.
Well, we clasp onto control. Like, I think one of the other things that I observe about our culture is everyone just wants to be in control all the time. And when you let go of that control, and really it just orients your perspective around a whole different paradigm, where if you say when you say I do believe in religion, like you have the agency to choose the belief system, and over a long enough period of time, you can witness change. You can witness the things that happen, and the belief in that sense is it's not that it's real or not real. It's is what these principles teaching me, is it true or false? And I think that if you fully surrendered to what Christianity and the Bible teaches you about how to live a life, you'll see peace. It doesn't guarantee happiness, doesn't guarantee riches, peace, joy. And I think those are two things that the world is lacking in. We're talking about moving at a pace where everyone's constantly busy, constantly stimulated, constantly worrying about the next thing. And this, when you get into the spiritual practices that steer you in a different direction, teaches you, don't be afraid. There are things that you don't know, that you can't see, that are happening in your life. The timing might not be now for the things that you're praying for, but I will give them to you later. And I think anchoring your thinking in that has such a deeper transformative power that can really shift your heart and genuinely change how you are and who you are, and the things that you praise, the things that you worship. And I think at the end of the day, it's a cliche as old as time. You hear it all the time. People, I was a famous actor, and then I got to the top and realized that it wasn't all that great. It's yeah, you're the millionth person to say that. And you wonder why. It's because there's other areas that are lasting and matter that fill us up with joy. And a lot of it goes back to giving. Yeah. I believe.
Yeah. The way I describe it is that we live in an I'm so back culture.
Yeah.
Where half of the posts I see on Instagram are okay, we took a break. I'm so back. I can't wait to do this again. And then half of the other posts are guys, I just need to take a break for a month. Things have been really stressing me out. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious, your perspective on just growing up in a lot of it. When did you get social media?
So I got social media when I was about 8 or 9 years old. It was Instagram. And so I was born 2005. That must have been 2012, 2013. The thing is, I remember distinctly, I got it before the algorithm switched from being chronological to actually algorithmic. And that was the big change. When you were just seeing posts from your friends, that's not harmful because it's your friends, and you didn't have the incentive at play to fake your life, because even if you did, it wouldn't get pushed out to any more people. Whereas once that switched from being chronological to pushing out the most liked post, then suddenly you flip the incentive. So I wonder if a big thing we need to do over the next few years is give an option And the thing is, this has obviously been fucking discussed at Meta and X and everywhere else, but they're never going to do it because there goes their
the
revenue
financial
scheme.
incentives are not the same.
So it's obvious if you're actually working for them that that's what needs to happen. We need to switch back from algorithmic to just chronological. Then there's no incentive to be a little clickbaity scumbag. Like it's wild.
Do you think, I feel like there would be an altered change in the way people operated almost immediately if the algorithm switched without people really realizing?
For sure. Even just the way they post in their story and the way you speak. I see so many people, and I'm guilty of this to a certain extent.
Yeah, I'm sure I am too.
You speak as though you're speaking to like a million people on your story and sort of just posting in this detached celebrity way.
Yeah.
Rather than being like, hey, I'm at the gym now. It's like, hey guys, I hope you're enjoying your day sort of thing. And it's just like all these different influencer traits that people pick up on.
Yeah.
But you're completely right. I think that would shift tremendously. It's hard for me to say how it's changed because I've sort of grown up alongside the change.
Right.
So it's hard to separate what was just a result of like teenage years and growing up.
Delineate just getting older versus this technology is totally changing.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And that's why, it's so valuable having this podcast and asking someone who's slightly older how they see it. But it has been a wild time for sure. And I think the biggest thing has just been anything that was crazy before is on steroids now. Like I remember being at secondary school, which is kind of like high school here. And we'd be like 13 years old and there would be guys like trading nudes of girls and like sending them around to group chats. And I'm sure that sort of activity took place before social media in the form of like, oh, Stacey sucked my dick, like it was really good, blah, blah, blah. All that locker room talk, which still happens today. But now you take that and it's like, oh, she's sent me a picture that I can screenshot and send around to people to prove that she's got the big tits that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a difficult time, I think, to be growing up. And I've got two half sisters who are 12 and 14, and even just seeing the difference between sort of people my age and them is wild because they grew up during COVID. Those were sort of formative. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's terrifying, and I think even just little like memes that are playful, they require a lot of context, and without that context, I see people literally taking the most like ironic, retarded memes seriously because they're like 12 years old and they never saw the initial thing.
Right. Yeah.
So weird.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know, a lot of our culture today is online, which is really worrisome because you don't have, like, when I was growing up, there's just, like, for the most part, just in-person reactions to things. Like, we got phones when I was in middle school, and the iPhone, I think, dropped in 2008, which was my freshman year of high school. And so it's like, or I think my psyche is like still based in just like real in-person interactions. There's no like texting or like sharing those things. So I think, and I imagine your sister's age demographic is placing a lot of value on what people think of them online versus probably not even really having too much like in-person conversations around like their value as a person, who they are. I worry about the next generation because like we need people leading in a way where they're pouring into people and building them up and encouraging them to find their gifts and do the things that they're put on this earth to do, and building up their esteem so they see the value in themselves and who they are. And I feel like that is incredibly hard to do online. Like you don't get that online.
No, you don't. I think there definitely needs to be some sort of fundamental shift in incentives, and I don't know how you do that with companies that don't want to give up their profit.
Yeah.
Other than
financial incentives will trump all until it's like something cataclysmic happens. Like something crazy happens,
Yeah, and the only intervention I see is government intervention, but then there's all the questions of freedom and if you have to have a passport to sign up to social media, then what happens when there's someone storing the data of your passport online? And it's something I haven't thought too deeply about, so I couldn't really give an articulate answer. But I think there do need to be questions of, is the Wild West time of the internet over, and is it time to actually sort of, I don't know, gatekeep it a little bit more, just have a bit more infrastructure in place? Because people say that it's the public square, right? But if you go out in the public square, if you punch someone in the face, you're going to get arrested and you're going to get your ID taken from you and you're going to get identified. So I think it's disingenuous to compare it to the public square because there's not the same consequences.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a double-edged sword. And I feel like on the other side, it's like if you start really monitoring it in a way where you're setting all the rules, it can become, it's like the most powerful technology on the planet. Like it can just be a tool to be used to subjugate people into thinking a certain way. And I think like that's a little bit scary to me as well, where it's like governments and people in power positions can, hey, you can say this, you can't say that, like those sorts of things. And we can't have discourse around it like that. I think that's a really dangerous path, but I agree with you. It's like, we got to get some of this stuff cleaned up online. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I often think, there are so many conspiracy theories about Russia interfering with bots online, and a lot of them have been confirmed that they were bots and that Russia were interfering with politics in the West. But regardless of any of that's true, it is true that mass interference is possible with social media. Like there is nothing stopping Russia deploying 10 million bots commenting on a post one thing, and then the nature of crowds, they're going to want to follow everyone else, and suddenly they're agreeing with something that they never would have otherwise agreed with.
Yeah. The manipulation tactics that can happen online are really scary to me, especially when you talk about foreign governments and getting into elections and things like that. And there's no doubt in my mind that those things are happening. I think warfare is now kind of eclipsed. Physical warfare obviously still happens, and there's like, it's happening today as we're speaking, but I think deeper and darker things are happening on the unseen level, where it's like, manipulating culture and changing how people think through technology, and votes being cast by bots, all that.
Fuck, I'm going to get taken out by Meta after this podcast.
Oh no, you're good.
I'm healthy and I'd never kill myself. What have been the biggest takeaways for you to wrap up this podcast that you've taken from doing your podcast? Have there been any sort of fundamental shifts in your perception of the world or yourself?
It's given me it's been a really empowering experience. I think when I started the podcast, I was unsure of like a lot of things directionally, like where I was going with my life, what I wanted to do. And the podcast has really served to answer a lot of those questions. And I feel like it gave me a lot of confidence in the sense that being able to literally just hit record and have conversations with cool people is like, it might not be the answer, but it will set the foundation for whatever you want to do. So I think you're doing an amazing thing where, if you have a vision for businesses that you want to start, ways you want to make money, ways you want to provide for other people, the podcast is such an incredible medium to do that, because you can just have long form conversations with interesting people, and just kind of create the vision along the way. And I really feel like that's where the Meatmafia podcast has taken me from the beginning, where we're just doing virtual podcasts, and just trying to get as many episodes done as possible, to interviewing some really cool people. And ultimately I feel like it's this amazing tool that balances the technology like problem that we're talking about, where like there's definitely downsides to tech, but I feel like this is one where it's so in person, like there's clear boundaries around like how we're speaking, and it's not like we're walking around with the camera in every single essence, like every single aspect of our life. So I've really enjoyed getting to dive deeper into the world of podcasting and kind of see the vision for like what we can do and who's going to come along for the ride unfold through the podcast. And there's obviously a million ways to do the podcast. Like I know sure tons of people set out from the beginning being like, I know exactly why I'm starting this podcast. I'm doing it to, start this business. But for me, it was like just kind of this exploration of like, all right, Brett and I have no experience in the health and wellness space. Let's just go out and have as many conversations as we can have, meet as many cool people as we can, and just see what unfolds. And it's been a great ride.
Yeah. And you guys talk a lot about meat, hence the Meat Mafia, and we haven't even had a chance to get into that, as well as a million other topics. So we'll have to have another chat next time I'm here in Austin.
Yeah, part 2 next time.
Fucking awesome, man. Where can people find you if they want to check out your stuff?
Yeah, Twitter's Meatmafia Harry, and then the Meatmafia Media on Instagram, and then Eat Noble Origins, or actually noble.origins on Instagram as well, or www.nobleorigins.com. And Noble is just our supplement business that we run. It's a beef-based protein powder. We have chocolate and vanilla flavors, so go check that as well.